this agricultural meeting to order on July 1st, 2019. Everybody rise for the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kathy, would you do the roll, please?
Walter,
Here.
Reed,
Here.
Arstow,
Here. All right. Well, our purpose for this meeting is to discuss the discharge zone issues. And as I understand, there really are two outstanding issues right at the moment. One has to do with a complaint that we received from citizens regarding the Bullet Ranch, and the second has to do with a discharge zone over near Sugar Run.
Sugar Mill?
Sugar Mill, yep. Sugar Mill. So I'm gonna take the easiest of the two first. And Tommy, I know you've had some discussions with the landowner over there. Do you wanna go through and describe to us, maybe summarize the email that we received a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, I don't have the email in front of me. I think everyone is pretty well aware of the incident that happened. How long ago was that? Just refresh us.
13, 14 months.
Yeah, okay, so last summer. Anyway, just to summarize that, what had happened is the gentleman had, they were out in their yard and there was shooting. They heard a lot of shooting, and it was coming from the direction that you can see on the map here that he presented to us. They didn't see anyone or know who was there or wasn't there, but it was coming from that general vicinity. I believe they went around the house, and shortly thereafter, their vehicle was struck by a bullet. And possibly from, correct me if I'm wrong, there was maybe even the house was hit too. There might have been a hole in the siding. You weren't sure or not, but
Not our house.
not your house, but a neighbor. So anyway, we've brought this up before. This is just a general I guess you could call this map, this is the possibilities. I think it was shared with council as well, that there was even a drone involved when the police was called. There was some type of a drone that was up in the air at the time, kind of seeing what was going on. It came from this area as well. So this map here just is a general map of where they heard it from and where it potentially could have come from. So with that being said, Scott, I know that we've talked about this in depth with not only with us, but with Mrs. King, who's the homeowner president, homeowner association president, and their board in the past. So I'd asked, I think that we're trying to reach out to the landowner, Mr. Schaefer, who doesn't live around here. Have we had any luck with that?
Not to this point. I can follow back up with them, but we've played some phone tag for a while, but I have not received a return call, so I'll follow back up with him.
Okay. So, with that being said, we obviously have the discharge map. I don't know if we have any other copies of these. I'll show you this after we're done. It looks like that parcel's kind of a T shape in behind Sugar Mill, and then it runs along the side to the north. So we could or could not change something on part of a parcel, or it has to be the entire parcel.
There's nothing in the discharge regulations that indicate it has to be a singular parcel. It says all land is placed into either discharge or non-discharge zone. It doesn't say parcel specific, so if you went down the middle of a parcel, that would, in my opinion, be complying with the regulations.
So that's the background. I'll just kind of sit back on this one, let you guys weigh in.
Well, the problem with having a half of the lot or a portion of the lot in or out of the discharge zone is that there's no legal description for that, and so it would become unenforceable from Chief Brooks isn't here, but it would become unenforceable because you'd have a difficult time. Where is this person on this property? you have to have it surveyed, and so there's a lot of expense. So, I would say that if we're going to take the property out of the discharge zone, we do wanna take the whole property out of the discharge zone. And I think, Mr. Mosier's gonna correct me if I'm wrong, because he's unknowing on discharge zones. Do we have to have a public hearing on that? I mean, is that a type of zone, it's a type of zoning function, Mr. Fulton, Mr. Mosier?
In the past, what we've done is, ordinance, to
Ordinance?
change
Okay.
it, 3 readings, 30 days.
Okay, all right, so that's kind of my 2 cents. I mean, I'm looking at the discharge map, I'm looking at the materials that, the gentleman provided to Mr. Lee and then to us. And it's one of those situations where the property itself, just looking at it on its own, it's probably properly in the discharge zone. But looking at what's around it, it may be problematic to have it in the discharge zone. This is gonna become a more and more frequent issue as we have growth around the city. And Sugar Mills are relatively new development, so.
And not to even, and to add to that, Todd, not to add, or not to even state that the property just to the north of it is developing now in, you know, densely populated development, so.
Yeah, excuse me, Andy, that's part of the, that's near where Tuscany Gardens is and
Yeah,
and
Emsweiler's.
I can't remember what the name of that is it gonna be a condos? I don't
It
know.
is, it's gonna be a condo association.
Okay, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's,
Scott, what, policy-wise, I know we've got the ordinance, but we've also had policy. So
Mhm.
policy-wise, with subdivisions, is there a distance from a subdivision that is policy that discharge zones are allowed or not allowed?
Not to my knowledge, no. There's no past policy. Typically, if it's a platted subdivision, it would be removed from the discharge zone. But there's no, and all surrounding properties within X feet.
Okay, and then my
There's
second
no
question.
policy on that.
Second question, the gentleman that does own this T shape, I mean, if he were here and he were against removing it from the discharge zone, he wanted to keep it in the discharge zone, what say does he have? Does he get a majority of the say? Does he get any say whatsoever?
It's, in the past, it's been specifically platted subdivision, parks, large commercial areas. I don't, to my knowledge, I have not been present where there's been any debate from residents on their desire or lack thereof to remove it from the discharge
Okay,
zone.
okay, I didn't tell you. Go ahead.
but I have. And, it gets, yes, Mr. Compton was the mayor, he had been a council member when this issue came up, and then I was on council when it was finally voted on. Yeah, it can get interesting. Certainly, it's, to me, it's like a zoning issue, and we would listen to the zoning pros and cons, as council has had, I know I'm not supposed to talk about this, but with the apartment complex issue and other things that have come here and there, other things that have come up, whether or not we're gonna rezone, so. You know, Andy, I think obviously you listen to everybody, and it's one of those where I don't think somebody gets a veto.
It's not necessarily a property right, essentially. This is a criminal versus non-criminal issue, right?
Right, it's a land, yeah, quasi zoning land use types of things, so the debate, I can tell you, can get pretty interesting, so.
Okay. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I think that, I know we've talked about this a bunch, and I think that we're at a point where we need to do something, whatever that is. I know that it's tough to police this. I know Chief Brooks isn't here, but I know we've reached out to Mr. Schaefer several times. I think I still feel pretty strongly that the landowner should have some say, but from that, knowing that situation, you know, him not living here and the farmer just basically farming it, you know, I've heard from enough Sugar Mill residents that I feel like it's time that we do something to help them. And it's been 14, 16 months now. It's more of a peace of mind than anything. You know, we don't have obviously the police force to go out and patrol that, but I do know that has been posted now, at least. So now that if someone was caught there, that since it's been posted, they could be charged with trespassing. And then also, if this was changed, for violation of the discharge zone. So, I think if nothing else, it's a peace of mind for Sugar Mill, and I think that they, you know, we owe that to them. And maybe even, I think Mr. Walther brings up a good point, maybe even, you know, I'm looking here behind Pataskla Ridge and the condos, and this piece of property is going to butt up to that, so not only does it protect Sugar Mill, it's gonna protect the properties that are being developed, you know, behind Tuscany Gardens and up there to the north, so, I just think that it's time that we do something, so.
Well, and I guess what I'm trying to, and I'm gonna just go ahead and put it out there, you know, at some point, we have to have a policy. I think there, besides just platted subdivisions, because, you know, obviously a firearm can discharge for, you know, a mile or more.
Sure.
So when you really start looking at this, you start looking at anybody that's fronting if you start looking at Sugar Mill, you start looking at Columbia Road, and you start looking at some of these other properties that are, you know, wide open farmland. And, you know, taking those out of the discharge zone may be completely against what, you know, a safe operator of a firearm would want to do. And I'm looking at the, you know, the different trajectories that were shown on this map. And really, quite frankly, this could have come from Columbia Road. quite
Sure.
frankly. It could have come from any of these properties in this area.
I think with, if I may, I think with the amount of shooting, you know, it almost seemed like automatic. I mean, I don't know that something like, it sure could come from that far, but it seemed pretty close range, not to mean that it can't. One thing that I did notice off here, just because, you know, I live there and it's close proximity, these lines on here they're a little bit off. I'm just gonna throw it out there and use our farm for an example. If you look at the farm we're talking about, the T, I know for a fact that line, that T to the south, our property does not go that deep up against Sugar Mill, it comes to the corner. So it's a little bit off, does that make sense?
Yep, I understand what you're saying.
So, and I get that, and, you know, living there close, you know, I don't wanna step over any boundaries or anything there as far as, you know, conflict of interest or anything, but, I would even want, you know, the protection for them and ourselves if it came to that point, so, but I can't speak for.
Okay, well, again, I'm thinking about, because when I look through this, I've done some research on this, trying to figure out what, you know, where to go with this type of thing, where to suggest to go with this. And, you know, there's not a lot of direction. We don't have any written policy other than we have some practice policy. And, you know, as Thomas, you bring up, as things do develop and continue to develop, you know, we're gonna have farmland that's adjacent to development for the next, you know, many years, decades. And if there's not a policy to do this, we're gonna be talking about this every year. I mean, it's gonna come up over and over and over and over again. So I don't know if there's some way to put an understanding that if a development occurs, the discharge zone is so much further away and it moves automatically as zoning occurs.
Makes sense.
I mean, that would make sense to me, so that at least you get notice that the zoning's happening. You know that if you're in a discharge zone, that discharge zone's going to be changed when the zoning occurs of your neighbor. It's a consequence of it happening. I'm not saying I'm absolute for that. I'm just saying that I think it'd be wise to have some kind of policy that we're gonna look at for the next several years.
Well, we don't wanna wait until somebody from some subdivision comes in and says, you know, yesterday afternoon, my car window was shattered because some guy was shooting his rifle in the discharge zone and it came onto my property. We don't have to wait for that. That's not acceptable. And that's why I think Mr. Walther is saying that as the city develops, so to me, it would be up to the owners who go into the development department to let the ag committee know, hey, this is developed out and we ought to consider moving the discharge zone on these properties. Because we're gonna have to give notice to all the homeowners, and it's a bit of a cumbersome process. I don't think we can do it automatically. We're gonna have to give notice to each individual homeowner as we do on a zoning change, so.
Kathy, you had something to add?
One thing, not to take a position on this, but our ag committee in previous years have also looked at
the issues with animal control, your wild animals in that area, and the effect of those. They attended a couple of seminars on that. Those are still available for anyone that wants to attend those when those come up, on how to control that wildlife.
And I think the ordinance is written in a manner that it could be even in a non-discharge zone, if there's a sick or dangerous animal, you can't discharge to eradicate that animal.
Yes.
So I agree, Kathy, that's not a bad point to worry about.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to mention, this is as all properties are, they're all shapes and sizes. I mean, if this was cut and dry, you would just take the woods essentially behind Sugar Mill and change it, but we're talking about doing the whole piece of property. Mr. Barstow brought up a good point, on that, so, I don't know if that's something we can look for in the future, but I do feel pretty strongly that I think we should at least try and move the ball a little bit on this, for the residents of Sugar Mill.
So the flip side of this coin is,
Yeah.
obviously downtown Columbus, people still get their window shot out, people still discharge. I mean, unless, the bad actors of the world are
Sure.
going to continue to happen, and I'm not saying that that should happen, but if somebody's not watching their property, if this guy is an absentee, landowner, and he's not participating in securing his own property, there's nothing to say that, just because we take it out of the discharge zone, doesn't mean someone's not gonna shoot.
100%,
I mean, it's just not gonna stop them necessarily, so I'm trying to balance those two ideas,
Agreed.
that's all, so.
No,
Okay.
I agree. I mean, where I live, across Broad Street is Harrison Township. And there's somebody who lives over there, large parcel, who has a large automatic weapon that he likes to fire. When I'm sitting on my porch, I just hope that he points it in the right direction, because if he doesn't, we're gonna get winged. So, whatever it is, it's big. So, yeah, it's not gonna stop a bad actor or someone who's irresponsible or someone who's some knucklehead from shooting a weapon, but it will provide some safety.
So that's kind of the transition to the next part of this discussion I wanted to try to get into, which is, as far as the city ordinance itself and different situations such as commercial application versus residential, what the ordinance says itself as far as enforcement and how these are hooked to, or can they be somehow utilized, or nuisance laws be utilized with somebody discharging in inappropriate times. So, Scott, I'm gonna ask you a couple quick questions here. We were presented at council in open session with some information. Things such as what was said during a zoning meeting, I think planning and zoning meeting for the Bullet Ranch. We were also presented with information regarding some structures that were supposed to be archery only. And I wanted to make sure, have you had a chance to look into those at all? Those statements that were given to council?
So the Bullet Ranch, those items went in, I believe it was 2013, 2014, prior to me coming on board with the city. So it is correct with the conditional use application that allowed that to be placed there, that it was talked about indoor range and outdoor archery. There was nothing on the site plans that showed any archery structures out back or otherwise. So that was not, as part of the approval, that was not considered. Archery was not based as part of their decision. It was not based upon, if it's archery, it's okay, or it's not. So with those, there was a certificate of compliance issued, so based upon what was approved, everything looks like it's okay at that time. Until I see documentation that says otherwise, that's what I have to go with.
Okay, so let me clarify. So if they had said archery only and then decided to shoot firearms outside, do you feel that that falls within their certificate of compliance?
Well, that's the unique thing, because now we fall back to the discharge zone.
I want to stay away from the discharge zone for just a moment. So if somebody so this goes to the discussion of a commercial application. This is not a resident utilizing, going out there and maybe shooting for recreation or target practice themselves. This person's getting paid to let people shoot at their facility. They have liability for it, so forth and so on. So anyhow, in their zoning, to come in and get their zoning, their occupancy permit and their zoning compliance permit, they made the statement that they would be archery only. So I don't want to, try not to conflate these two issues.
Never said archery only.
Okay.
They
that-
said they were looking to do archery outside, but that was not the crux of the decision for the conditional use. That was the indoor range.
Okay,
So the crux was not based upon archery only. They said they were going to do archery outside. It never limited it to any other type of use outside. They said their plan was to do archery.
okay. So if another business came into town and they wanted to put up a shooting range, they wanted to put up a range, an outdoor shooting range,
Mm-hmm.
what process would they go through to get that outdoor range? What would they have to show us?
I don't know, because we have the discharge zone, so this is not
I-
a zoning.
So we don't have anything in our, so let me interrupt you, Scott. We don't have anything in our zoning text that talks about shooting ranges.
It does.
Okay, so when they come in for a shooting range, what do they have to show us? Do they have to show us their security? Do they have to show us their backstop? Do they have to show us their distance? Do they have to do any type of perimeter type of analysis?
The
Go ahead.
So the only issue that it comes down for zoning is that use permitted there or not, based upon the zoning classification.
Okay.
We don't have regulations that talk about backstops or anything like that. That's handled on a much different level from a zoning standpoint.
What level
However,
is that one, by chance? That just so-
however,
Go ahead.
if the appropriate board said we're concerned about safety, or we're concerned about noise, or we're concerned about other things, they could provide that information upon request to, say, the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that could be reviewed. However, it all comes back to the discharge regulations potentially in conflict with zoning.
Okay, can I stop you before we get to the discharge? Because I'm staying on zoning right now. So if somebody wanted to put a shooting range outside, and if the discussion of safety or noise or anything else came up, they would have to supply those studies or those type of engineering plans or a plan for that, correct?
That's correct. If there were, I mean, there's a standard plan showing a site plan for what they propose to do. However, should the appropriate board say we have concern about noise or safety, please provide us with studies showing that this will be done in a safe manner.
So would the appropriate board in your mind be the Ag Committee?
It would either be Planning and Zoning Commission or the Board of Zoning Appeals to approve
Okay.
zoning applications.
Okay.
But if it's a permitted use, it wouldn't be.
Well, wait.
Okay.
So let's say we have a one garage, you know, one door garage, and they want to expand, and now they want to do, you know, they want to be a larger garage. They'd have to come back for a zoning permit, correct? Even though they have an occupancy and they have the correct permits for that one door garage, if they want to come back and expand, what do they have to do?
These are a lot of hypotheticals here that there's
What I'm
not
trying
a
to get
one,
to is
there's not a
they've changed-
direct answer, because we must look at the zoning classifications. Depending upon where they are, what they're proposing to do, there's a multitude of different ways you could have to go. So arguably, at the bare minimum, they would be required to submit and receive a zoning permit.
Okay,
Bare minimum hypotheticals.
I understand. That's what we're dealing with. Okay, that's what I'm trying to ask. So if they had said, we're coming in here to do archery, they had gotten a use for that, essentially through the planning and zoning. And if they wanted to change that use to do something else, shoot a gun outside, anything like that, in a commercial situation, would they not have to come back to you for a zoning permit to do that?
Again, hypothetically, yes, arguably that'd be the bare minimum, but I don't think we can completely distance ourselves from the discharge regulations.
I'm coming back to that in just a second. So could the planning and zoning request that? You said there's a couple different boards that would be responsible. So if we knew there was a use that was going on that wasn't initially specifically stated that could happen outside, could the planning and zoning have them come back in and ask them questions? Hey, how are you guys being safe? What is your protocol for, safety or for noise issues? I think those are very good questions that a planning and zoning board would ask if they were given the opportunity to do it initially. Now I'm saying, can they, after they've learned that there's other uses happening outside, can they have them come back and present?
Potentially, if an application before them is required.
Okay. Okay. Tom, do you have any questions on that kind of part of it? I'm trying to decipher between zoning issues and discharge issues.
No, I get it. Mr. Barstow, did you have something? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, as I said in the previous discussion, to me, discharge is a type of zoning. It is a type of control over the property. And the problem is that the ordinance, and so I'm talking about Colorado Ordinance 505.11D. When you read that, it's no owner, lessee, or other occupant. So to me, there's no commercial versus residential differentiation in the ordinance. It's owner, lessee, or other occupant, or person having control or exercising control of land. That could be anybody, as long as they fit in one of those categories. You can't discharge any firearm outside of an enclosed building from dusk to dawn. So to me, this is a specific restriction on discharge from dusk to dawn. You can't do it during night hours, other than for hunting, as long as, and that's not what we're talking about with the bullet range. The bullet range is not doing any hunting, and that's a whole different thing, and there's presumably no self-defense going on there. So that's somebody tried to rob the place in the middle of the night, and Mr. Garabusi ran down there and was defending his property, that'd be something different. And then for other than lawful hunting, the discharge of firearms, and this is where I get this, in my view, the ordinance circles back on itself. The discharge of firearms otherwise permitted shall be restricted in duration to a time period that shall not unreasonably harass, annoy, or disturb livestock or residents within the city. Well, who decides what that restriction is? I mean, to me, I see this as a sub-function of zoning, and to me, it doesn't make any difference in this particular situation whether or not the Bullet Ranch said, hey, we're gonna have archery, or we're gonna have hammer throwing, or we're gonna have whatever outside. They're in the discharge zone, and the discharge zone ordinance permits them to discharge firearms from dawn to dusk. Not for hunting and not for self-defense, those are exceptions, from dawn to dusk. And then the problem is the ordinance kind of circles back on itself and has this restriction. Why? It doesn't say who comes up with this restriction, and there's no guidance in the ordinance as to what. To me, it's in conflict. It says, well, you can do it from dusk till dawn, or dawn till dusk. And then the question becomes, does it disturb livestock or residents? It doesn't say anything about domestic animals. It just says livestock. Well, that's what it says.
Or is it an unrealistic or an unreasonable length of time, or is it done at an unreasonable time during that dawn to dusk? So it really gets convoluted. It's very subjective.
It's a poorly written ordinance. So
what I was
that's before I was on city council. Throwing that out. So I think there's just to me there's it's. I think that we have to. I'm not sure that I'll throw this as to Mr. Fulton is coming up with time, place, and manner restrictions on the discharge zone. Is that a function of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Ag Committee, BZA, full council?
In my opinion, I think it starts with the Ag Committee, because you were responsible for reviewing the discharge map and the associated regulations. I'd be happy to attempt to help craft the regulations for review, but it wouldn't need to go to Planning and Zoning or Board of Zoning Appeals, because this is all criminal code. Like, Planning and Zoning has no legal way to enforce this.
Right. I was just curious. What?
So I've got one other piece of the puzzle, Todd, that I was thinking about also was, and Tommy, I don't know if you want to go ahead.
I do, but
go ahead. I'm going to move on to another piece. Go ahead with that.
So I was gonna hop out of the planning and zoning piece and the discharge piece. And much like we have a situation in Sugar Mill that needs addressed, we can debate and go back and forth and fix this, which I agree with Mr. Barstow. It needs fixed, but that doesn't resolve the problem right now. Again, this would not be, I think this would fall more along the lines of Chief Brooks. Chief, you can plant you anyway on this.
I'll try.
for the time being, I think to try and find some resolution to this, I think we needed to make sure that, that the gunfire is actually coming from there. And I know the tests have been done, decibel tests,
That's third
privately,
parties that- yeah.
privately. So whether or not those are accurate or not, what I would throw out there as a solution is let's work with the residents and the Bullet Ranch, and let's have a third party that's agreed upon by everybody, if possible, to go out and do these decibel tests. And I think ODNR will do that. And I think they will. If not, we could find somebody else. Let's find out for sure. Because if you look at this map, this discharge map, wherever it went in my stack of stuff, there's the Bullet Ranch is there. And I'm not saying, just for clarity, I'm not saying that it's not. I'm just saying that there's a lot of other places, especially being right by Columbus Airport. There's a lot of other places this could be coming from. I think it's only fair to everybody to determine that that's actually where it's coming from. It very well might be, I'm not discrediting that, but let's find a third party that's not done by the Bullet Ranch, because I think they went out and did their own readings, to go in and test. Let's do, what kind of testing would you call that?
Just a decibel, taking a decibel reader out there and going.
At least that gives some clarity to the situation. I think that would that be something that you could set up?
I mean, if you want me to reach out to ODNR, I'd be more than happy to do that and try and get that worked out.
Maybe work with the property owner and the
Sure.
Bullet Ranch to come to some consensus to see if we want it to be neutral and we want it to be fair for everybody so that they trust. And at least we can determine that while we're working on this other part that you guys are talking about.
Right, because, Tommy, your solution, this is the city, and all the yellow is the discharge zone. So it's a huge, it is
Percentage-wise.
70% of the city probably is in the discharge zone. So whatever solution we come up with is gonna apply not just to the Bullet Ranch, it's gonna apply citywide. So, it's gonna be kinda like the infamous, health and safety regulations that are suggested for cutting grass and things like that cause, so I think this is gonna take some time, but I think in the meantime, Mr. Lee suggested to try to figure out, hey, what's going on, and try to get everybody happy.
One more thing, if you look at this, I mean, the development where they're at is completely surrounded by discharge allowed areas. And I know that there's also, the Hanaduchi, I believe they do shooting over there. You're in a flight path. Again, not saying it's not Bullet Ranch, but I just think that it's fair to everybody that we determine where it's coming from before we start, going down this road of, pointing fingers when we don't know 100%. I could be wrong, but I think it's a solution. Not everybody's gonna be happy, but at least it's a start of coming up with some type of solution. Is that something that you could facilitate?
I'd be more than happy to try.
What do you guys think, Todd, Andy? I mean, is that a good
I think
starting point?
I think there's that starting point, and I think there's a little bit more, in my opinion.
How about it?
And I wanna ask Mr. Mosier a quick question.
Sorry.
I was trying to.
Trying to help Mr. Mosier.
I was also
Yeah.
looking at some other.
So, Mr.
problematic
Mosier,
areas.
Question I guess I have is, and I just want to clarify, make sure that we're all on the same page here is there any revised code that would prohibit commercial establishments for, even if they're in a discharge zone, prohibit them from having an outdoor shooting range without a specific zoning permit or a shooting permit? I'd really like to know if there's anything out there in the code, because I'm sure this has happened in other locations. We're not the only unique place in the world that has an outdoor shooting range. And I would wonder if the Ohio Revised Code has anything that would either limit or require special permits to do that. And Scott, I know our code does not. I'm wondering if there's an Ohio Revised Code that supersedes it.
Sure. My answer to that would be I haven't done the research on that. I would be fairly certain that there is not a general revised code provision that would dictate this specific scenario. My guess is it would fall back on and revert to the zoning designation in terms of
we're talking about a commercial use, a shooting range type use, I think it would revert to your local zoning district classification. Can look into it certainly, but I would say
Okay.
be pretty 90% sure that there is
Perfect.
not one.
That's fine. That's what I would ask, if you could look to see if there's anything out there, any kind of case law that has shown that some type of ordinance has to be, or not ordinance, I'm sorry, some kind of zoning code. And then the one thing I was gonna add to your suggestions, Tom, and I agree with both you and Todd, I'm wondering if the city can go further and actually look for recommendations to the Bullet Ranch. If this is in the, and kind of, this is what my line of questioning was regarding the zoning and the BZA and the planning and zoning. You know, we've got complaints, if you wanna continue to shoot in the discharge zone, because you really, that right is something that is not necessarily a land use right. Do you have recommendations, sound blocking, landscaping, what are your safety protocol, those types of things? And even ask them to voluntarily submit that to us, and help the city study this issue to get it right. I think those questions would have been asked if this was originally brought to planning and zoning as an issue for shooting. So we're in hindsight now, looking back.
Yeah, I mean, we don't, when somebody wants to open a garage, I mean, we don't, you know, ask them if they're complying with OSHA and a whole bunch of other things. I'm not willing to go that far. I mean, I think that right now what we have is voluntary compliance from the Bullet Ranch. But I think that this regulation, the ordinance, code section, although not model of drafting, I think allows them to shoot from dawn until dusk. Whether it's commercial or not. I don't see, there's nothing in the discharge ordinance that says if you're a commercial entity, you have to do something different. As Mr. Mosier has opined, there's nothing in the revised code that would differentiate that. So, and to me, the fact that they got, again, they said they were gonna do archery, and now they're shooting in the discharge zones. They're in the discharge zones.
The only differential I would make, so if I wanna work on my truck, out of my driveway, I don't have to have screening. But the code does require certain things to happen when you're a commercial entity, you have to do it differently. That's the only part I was trying to differentiate to, was, I'm not saying that they can't shoot. They just may have to do it differently than, say, a recreational owner of a house that's going out and maybe shooting a couple tin cans, versus somebody who is, has a clay, shooting range. For instance, that garage has to have certain screening for their cars. They have to have certain commercial issues that have to go in front of P&Z. That was the difference I was trying to make. And I agree 100%. This ordinance does not say that. It doesn't say anything about that.
There would be nothing to prevent a private property owner from, who's in the discharge zone, from setting up a clay pigeon shooting experience for him and his neighbors and his friends, and charging them money or not charging them. Doing it for fun or there's no commercial. So I'd like to, if we can get some, if there's voluntary compliance on behalf of the Bullet Ranch, if the Bullet Ranch chooses not to comply, then the aggrieved neighbors may have other avenues that they can pursue to stop what they can see as a nuisance. But I don't think it's the city's business, because I don't think we have the authority of this ordinance to go around doing things like that. So, and if we change the ordinance, then fine.
Agree 100%. And Tom, to your point, changing the ordinance, at this point, we have to look to all property owners within Pataskala. So we change the ordinance for this situation, it's gonna apply to somewhere that is not as residentially dense as others.
I understand. I like to make one more point, is obviously we have Chief Brooks committed to working on Bullet Ranch issue, to see if we can get some testing out there done by a third party property owner with Bullet Ranch. But also back to Sugar Mill, because I know we're pressed for time, really pressed for time. It doesn't sound like there's really an appetite to do anything with that right now, but I would like to come back.
Oh, no,
I don't think so.
Absolutely. I think we need to move forward on an ordinance. Brats for taking the property out of the discharge zone?
Yeah, my
My only hesitation with it is we have not made contact with the property owner.
We have to do the process. Tom.
Yeah,
have
we
to do
have
the
to follow
process.
the
yeah.
proper process
I'm
of
saying,
notification and
I'm
everything.
saying, let's start the process.
Okay.
I was gonna make a motion for that before we adjourned.
I misread the situation.
Oh, no,
so
no, no, no,
absolutely.
no.
I was gonna ask for a motion for that.
Okay,
Tom,
I
so.
totally misread, but I thought I mean.
Yeah.
4 minutes.
Yeah, we can do this in less than 4 minutes.
Absolutely.
Are there any other issues in front of the Ag Committee? Anything else you want to discuss?
No.
So is it, excuse me, sir, is it just that one property, Mr. Schaefer's, is the one that we're considering changing? Okay,
I believe that's the motion.
just make sure I get
Yeah.
that correct.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that the Ag Committee recommend to council that the property we've been discussing, we can get a legal description of it. Start the process to have that taken out of the discharge zone.
All right.
Have a
I'll gladly-
motion?
I'll second that.
Second? All right. Kathy?
Walter,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Barstow.
Yes.
All right. Motion passes. Anything else?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Kathy?
Walter.
Yes.
Lee, Barstow.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next meeting in 2 or 3 minutes. Don't get too comfortable.